let's just start by talking about those narratives. I'm curious how you think about the next several months and next couple of years and what those narratives could look like.
Look, I think the convergence of AI and crypto is going to, be top of mind for everyone. But I think the key behavior I see that's a bit troubling is we have this like sort of addictive cycle of speculative tokens and creation of speculative tokens and listing. I think for us at least, when we're looking at our products and our roadmap, there's a lot of focus on how do we get the industry, all of us, away from some of that. Now, naturally, some of that needs to exist in our industry to accelerate development, but when you look at our products and services for a core exchange business, you'll notice that we're actually diversifying at a pretty fast pace because we think we have a responsibility to get people away from that addictive cycle and more towards like real world utility.
Okay, how do you balance this idea that you want to get away from speculation and we want to move away from financialization, but you're also the CMO of one of the largest exchanges in the world where you make money from speculation?
I think if you look back like 5 years ago, we definitely were just an exchange. And I think in 2022, we launched our Web3 wallet. It was really a big question mark for most people in the industry. They looked at us and said, well, you really have a core exchange business. Why would you even go into Web3, which is really hard to monetize? And nobody's really figured out how to monetize other than maybe charge transactional fees. What we felt was inherently it was really important for us to diversify and get out of that core business, because how many tokens can you eventually create and list and have launch pads for, and eventually the retail demand we feel is going to run out, is going to dry out. So it's really important to give people the choice. And we did that with our Web3 wallet. It's a purely self-custody wallet. It grew about 20x over the last 2-3 years. I believe it's the largest crypto wallet today in our industry. It's got 130 plus chains. And the key thing that we try to solve there is, I think you and I have spoken about this. When you look at your device 3 years ago during the DeFi wave, you found yourself having 3 to 5, maybe 6 different wallet apps. And we noticed that fragmentation, and what we did was consolidated it into one wallet app strategy. And that way you don't have to bridge. You've got an integration of 130 plus chains, and it really brings people together to access everything in one platform. So again, I think the point of our roadmap is that we continue to get away from just the core centralized exchange business.
Take us into maybe the room, like the executive meetings and stuff, when you're saying, because you're basically what you're doing is you're maybe sacrificing some revenue in the short term to be the gateway to open up everyone in this room to the consumer opportunities of crypto. How do you guys make that balance? How do you think about that?
I think it's a really tough decision because when you think about it, you've got this huge opportunity to capture revenue, capture user growth. And this industry is extremely, extremely competitive. So you don't want to lose out on that growth. But on the other side, maybe we were slow in growing our exchange for the right reasons. When you look at our self-custody or our decentralized products, they've actually grown quite exponentially. Maybe we'll figure out how to monetize it one day. But people really focus on trading volume. And fast forward 5 years from now, I just don't think that's going to be the metric that we hold ourselves accountable for.
Yeah, so when you look at the consumer apps, like something like a Polymarket or something about stable coins and payments, will you guys start to own those applications? Will you build them in-house? Will you be the gateway to those things?
I think our core purpose is to always be the ultimate gateway, the central point where people can discover and access these applications, including dApps. I think we have a large, really, really large dApp ecosystem now in a search engine. So for us, would OKX go and build its own stablecoin network? Probably not. That's not how we view the world. We see that as a conflict of interest. For us, at least as a business, I think we're going to focus on real-world applications. I know some of the speakers were talking about, well, where do the next billion people come from? And I think at OKX, our focus is how do we get away from the core exchange business, go into decentralized products, go into payment products, work with companies like MasterCard and Stripe, and bring 1 billion people with real-world utility.
Maybe let me pivot a little bit into more of a controversial, sensitive topic, which is kind of the underbelly of the industry. So as the CMO of one of the largest exchanges in the world, I think you're probably privy to information that not all of us in the room are privy to. Maybe, I don't know how much you can share, but I'd love to hear just what's going on in kind of the underbelly of the industry. What are some of the activity, maybe at other exchanges, maybe it's just the rest of the industry that starts to kind of concern you? I don't know how much you can share, but.
Gosh. Well, look, I think it's natural. Everyone here, our industry is very competitive. I think the underbelly I would probably point to is you can compete with each other. There's probably developers here competing with each other, on networks, but there's a way to compete. I think the right way to compete is to compete on technology, not by throwing rocks at your competitors and what have you. I think that's very important. That's what we typically see is when others in our industry will see OKX achieve big milestones, uh, licenses, banking relationships, what have you. I think rather than outcompeting us, we see some really nefarious behavior where they will try to hurt us. And I don't think that's good. And I'm not suggesting every company in our category does it. I think you look at a company like Coinbase, very clean. Their founder's great, and they play really well with all of us. But I can't say that for everyone else. And I hope people have their eyes wide open at that type of behavior.
So the message maybe is compete on product, don't compete on regulatory capture, backdoor dealings.
Well, think about like the chip manufacturing industry or software industry. There were these like dirty competitive games.
Yeah.
Who were the winners? You can kind of clearly see the people who focused on tech and ultimately competed on tech are the ultimate winners. I think that's what OKX is going to do. We don't get distracted by this. It's certainly distracting at points, but we have confidence. I think we're a technology-first company. The proof is in the pudding, and I think that's how we're going to compete. And we're hoping that the other industry players would compete that way. Now, you asked me about the underbelly. I think the one other thing I would call out is, as a CMO, I receive 9 out of 10 inquiries that I get from journalists are typically about like hysterical, investigative, like gossip column stuff. And I wish it wasn't that way. And I'm sure not every journalist thinks that way, but I think the metrics for journalism are very different. It's really optimized towards clicks and eyeballs versus quality editorial. I wish I could tell you that all the good stuff OKX does. I wish 9 out of 10 journalists were reaching out to inquire about that, but it's typically not that. It's mostly about like gossip stuff, or it's about like speculation on whether we were getting investigated or somebody else is getting investigated, and it doesn't build up the industry. It's sort of like it's a conflict because even the journalists are in our industry. They should be supporting the industry, and oftentimes it doesn't feel that way.
You mentioned journalists. You mentioned other exchanges. What's the hardest thing that you deal with on a day-to-day basis?
I think the hardest thing for us is, again, compromising on short-term user growth. So when there are new tokens that are highly speculative, there's a big community, there's a lot of energy, how do you make the tough decision of not giving community what they're demanding? Because these communities, what will happen is, you'll go on X and they'll demand you to list these things. So there comes a point where you kind of have to list it. But I think that's the key challenge is how do we sort of continue to diversify, get away from that stuff, and really focus on applications. Like you look at OKX Pay, that's our take at bringing self-custody into a more practical mode where you actually don't get to, there's not a high probability of you losing your keys and losing your crypto. So I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to shift even our internal culture to a place where we just don't have that dependency on the core exchange business.
Will that start to show up in the product decisions and go-to-market decisions that you guys make? For example, one way that you could make a lot of money really quickly is listing every new token. You could be the first to list every token. You're going to make more money than the other exchanges.
Yep.
You can make a conscious decision to pull back on that, right? Which would be more in line with the ethos that you're talking about, but you're going to sacrifice revenue.
Well, look, if you look at our exchange today, I can confidently say we're 2 to 3 years ahead of every other platform in terms of compliance and regulations. We're licensed by the Singapore regulator. In UAE, we've got a complete license with banking partnerships. That happens because regulators have confidence in our compliance controls. And that will continue to limit us and others in how we list tokens and how we think about tokens. So I think it's really important 5 years from now, I don't think the industry will look like what it looks like today.
Yeah. You just ran the whole redesign. I think you were in charge of the whole redesign for the entire UI, UX of the OKX wallet. What was that process like? And maybe differently asked, I heard someone talking yesterday about nobody in crypto knows how to find product market fit, right? The product people really aren't in the industry yet. I'm curious how you guys thought about finding product market fit for this, how you went about this full redesign.
I think the philosophy for us is consensus kills all great ideas. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it works. And we've learned from that. So I think for the redesign in particular, what we said is, look, we're going to identify 3 people at the company. We're going to create a small squad team. We're going to move fast, no surveys. We use what we have, the data we have, and what we learn from our customers, and execute really fast so we can put something out there and get recall. So I think the biggest learning from that redesign has been is, one, it's really important that if we're going to make crypto part of our daily lives, that design, user experience ultimately is prioritized. And number 2, execute in small teams. You actually don't need a large team to do great things.
Yeah. Maybe as we think about wrapping this up, you guys just had this huge reveal. I mean, I'd like to hear why this Fireside Chat is called Mild, Mild West, right? And for those who don't know, you had a big premiere of your film. And I've gotten to know you over the years, and you've been spending a lot of time and energy on this film. I think let's talk about the film. I'd love to hear why you spent so much energy on it.
I think we wanted to change the narrative of the crypto industry. And I think when you talk to your friends and family members who are not in crypto, that often, you'll hear, oh, crypto's the wild, wild west. And I think it becomes a point where that becomes annoying. And that's not always the truth. There's a lot of optimism in this room. There are a lot of great developers building great stuff. So in order for us to change the public opinion, we felt we needed to create a content piece that would actually counter that narrative. And that narrative can then not just be used externally with all of you guys, but also the way we change our thinking. Now, you can imagine when we onboard new people into our company, we have 5,000 employees globally, they get to watch this piece of creative. They know where our heads are at and where our character is. That we don't want to stand for this addictive cycle of speculation or, scammers, snipers, rug pullers. We just want to get away from that. And I think this content piece, this short film, is a nod to how do we all come together, own and govern the narrative, and don't let the scammers identify who we are and what we stand for.
Amazing. Yeah, I think we all resonate with that. Can we watch the film?
Well, we can watch the trailer. I think we might have enough time for the trailer.
Cool.
Yes.
Let's play the trailer then. Thank you, folks. Yeah, appreciate it.
Smells like gold.
Let me tell you a little story.
I'm tired of this.
Okay, where's the gold?
Enough!
No gold?
Yeah!
You're the only one who's not having fun.
It's a fair trade. Better be good.